Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan. As you noticed, I've in the background a picture that I have of Ann Arbor, which is not necessarily in my nature. But I have this picture because it's of Mott Children's Hospital, where my daughter had a couple of open heart surgeries about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And but the big house is in the background of this too. And well, it's again, not in my nature. I will say, good luck, go blue to Michigan tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. And while I may bleed green now, I actually grew up a Wolverine. So this is where I admit that my dad is a proud alum, as is my brother. So I too will say go blue tonight, even if other members of my household may vehemently disagree with me. So we do want to kick off our first show of 2024 by welcoming one of our newest members, Driftwood Deli. They're located in Munising. So welcome to our owners, Amber and George Schultz. They actually also own By George Brewing in Munising and joined to participate in our ERC, Employee Retention Credit Program. So welcome to the Driftwood Deli and By George Brewing team. And if you are watching, there's still time to check your eligibility for the Employee Retention Credit, and you can learn more on our website. And of course, we are welcoming this new member on behalf of our sponsor, Consumers Credit Union, and you can learn more about them at consumerscu.org. All right, so there was quite a bit of news that happened as we closed out 2023. We've taken the last couple of weeks off, so we have some things to work through here. Let's start off with redistricting. And Brian, you were right. You called it. You were right about the decision that was issued late in 2023. So tell us what happened.
Yeah, this was the one lawsuit that I thought had a lot of merit. There were several lawsuits challenging the validity of the maps that determine the district lines for the state house and the state senate districts. And most of them I didn't see as having any hope of making it through the process. But this one in particular, because it disperses or it breaks up minority populations so much that it was very likely, and in fact, what happened was the minority representation in the House and the Senate both dropped substantially because of the way these maps were drawn. I thought that was a direct violation of the Voting Rights Act. So while I was right that that the maps would be struck down, or at least several of the districts in Southeast Michigan would, but I wasn't right in terms of the citation. The U.S. Court of Appeals, so Federal Court of Appeals, had determined based on the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. I was really looking at an interpretation, the traditional interpretation of the Voting Rights Act, which is a statute, a federal statute. They really didn't review it under those terms. They reviewed it under the U.S. Constitution in terms of drawing the maps based on race. In this case, disadvantaging minority voters in their right to represent themselves. And so, in other words, this was on a basis that was much stronger than even what I thought. And so it wasn't just a regular decision too. So it was what I would call a harsh decision toward those who drew the maps. That a lot of times when maps are drawn, you don't have like a perfect record of everything that was said and everything that was done during the process. We did in this case with the Citizens Redistricting Commission, where a lot of that the general public, couldn't have seen before, but because it was in a lawsuit, the courts could see everything that happened in all of these meetings, and they determined very directly that the maps were drawn based on race, and they took the minority voters and split them up so much in order to try to make the maps more fair on a partisan basis that they made them unfair on a racial basis. And so they were declared unconstitutional because of that reason. And now this applies to 13 districts. The 13 districts are all located in Southeast Michigan, and it applies to the House and the Senate. Now, what's interesting though, so in the House, it's districts 1, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, and 14. In the Senate, it is districts 1, 3, 6, 8, 10, and 11. So 13 districts total, split between the House and the Senate. And now, here's the thing about drawing district lines. It's very unlikely that they would be able to redraw just these districts, because all of those district lines, there's two sides to them. There are other districts that border these districts. And so probably, I would say at least twice as many districts as are listed here in this lawsuit, the ones that were specifically found to be unconstitutional, would be impacted by this decision. And you might recall, I actually had a map behind me in one of our small business briefings, and it was the districts that I was showing you were the districts that the court found unconstitutional. They're kind of pillar districts, these north-south districts that took about 30 or 35% of the district were made up of people in Detroit, and those districts tended to be around 90% or 95% even Black. And then they reached up into the suburbs that were primarily white, and so it really diluted the impact or the ability of the minority voters to elect somebody from their part of the district. And so I think it's fairly likely that more than just 13 districts, or very likely that more than just 13 districts will be impacted.
So Brian, if these maps are indeed thrown out, what's the process? Like, who would draw the new ones?
That is a question that the courts are grappling with right now. We do have a Citizens Redistricting Commission, which is still in place. There were 3 members that resigned. One of them was like living in a different state, still drawing a paycheck for the gig, but finally resigned when that was discovered. And then they have like a drawing. They randomly draw people, and they filled the vacant positions. So technically, the Redistricting Commission, the body that drew the original illegal maps, could just draw new maps. But there is a very, very short period of time here because elections are upon us. And just in April is when candidates would need to file for running in these districts later on in the summer for the primaries and the general election in November. So they really need in the next couple months new maps. What the plaintiffs, so those who challenged the maps, what they're asking for is what's called a special master, somebody who is appointed by the court to draw maps, to do it according to the court standards, to do it outside of any kind of partisan consideration. One thing that is possible, and what I'll say I kind of expect to happen, is that the Citizens Redistricting Commission will probably move forward and try to draw new maps, and the court will appoint somebody to also draw maps, just as essentially as a backup. So if the Citizens Redistricting Commission doesn't do it right or continues to disenfranchise minority voters, then the court's appointee, those maps would simply be approved by the court. Or another possibility is that the court could appoint a special master to supervise the drawing of the maps by the Citizens Redistricting Commission. So a couple different directions that this could go from here, but I do expect they won't sit on this for very long because the calendar to get this corrected is very, very short.
All right, so here in the near term, what is the next step?
Well, and I would say kind of a surprise, the Citizens Redistricting Commission that originally had met and couldn't decide what to do, then met later on when they were filling those 3 vacant positions. They voted to challenge this decision up to the United States Supreme Court, which frankly I think is a waste of time. But the Supreme Court could either take the case and then decide, or they could just refuse to take the case, which means the Court of Appeals decision would stand. I kind of expect that to happen, that they will just say they're not going to take the case, which means the current decision stands, and the Court of Appeals will have the ability to make the decision. But there's one really, really big, actually, there's two big questions, but one, I think, enormous question that's in front of the court right now, which is what to do with the Senate maps. With the House maps, it's one thing to say, yep, these House districts, which were House districts 1, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, and 14, those House districts, they have to be redrawn in time for elections this November. But Senate districts are 4 years. Those will not be up again in the normal cycle of things until 2026. So the question is, will the court require those Senate maps to be redrawn and for special elections to happen this November? That would truly be a kind of a ground shaking type of an event, to have current Senate terms cut short in order to accommodate new maps halfway through the current term. Now, you might say, a reasonable person might say, well, that sounds like a lot of hassle. Why would they do that? You're going to have elections in 26 anyway. Why don't you live with these maps until 26? What the plaintiffs are saying, which are made up at least there's a couple groups of plaintiffs, but those that are the Detroiters are saying, look, you shouldn't make us wait that long to have proper representation in the legislative process. Yeah, it will be disruptive to cut this term short and have special elections early to correct this injustice. But it's worth it because the people in Detroit deserve to have representation, which I think is going to be a pretty powerful argument. But that is something that is an open question right now. So the Court of Appeals will continue to work on this in terms of deciding if a special master supervises or maybe draws the maps or draws parallel maps along to the redistricting commission. And they'll have to decide whether or not the Senate, the current 4-year terms turn into 2-year terms in favor of special elections. There's one other thing, Sarah, that I think would be kind of interesting, which is that there are special elections that are happening like right away later on this month for 2 House districts. And while those districts are not in those that are being that were declared unconstitutional in this decision, the borders of those districts absolutely could be impacted when you redraw their neighbors. So the court will probably have to make a decision on what happens with these special elections that are happening. These are the ones where we had a couple of state reps run for mayor, Westland and in Warren. So these 2 state reps ran for mayor. They both won, so they vacated their seats. These are special elections to fill those seats. Those are happening like literally right now. SBM actually endorsed a couple of the candidates in those elections. So that those districts could definitely be impacted. They're not in this decision, but they could be impacted because they neighbor the districts that are in this decision.
I did just drop the press release we issued last week about the endorsements in those districts. So people who might be in the 13th or 25th can take a look at that. Certainly a lot at play here, and I know we'll continue to keep everyone updated on the briefing. Another issue that we've closely followed was the temporary income tax cut. The Court of Claims ruled at the end of the year that it was indeed temporary. And so, Brian, kind of walk through what people need to do now that that has changed again here for 2024.
There was a challenge to the state treasurer's decision to make the reduction in the income tax rate from 4.25 down to 4.1 to make that temporary, like a 1-year thing. This is a disputed thing in the law. We covered this. This is kind of about a year ago. This was a big controversy in the legislative process. And the legislative process essentially kept the status quo, and so the administrative and court now action has been taken to put the personal income tax rate back at 4.25. That decision when it was challenged, first, if somebody sues the state, it goes to what's called the Court of Claims. It's always the first step to a suit in state court against the state. And the Court of Claims found in favor of the treasurer. In other words, said the treasurer can set the rate higher, that was an interpretation, a legal interpretation of the law that allowed her to do that. So that that decision will be appealed. However, I think it's fairly unlikely that the that an appeal will bear fruit. In other words, an appeal will not get the rate lowered back down. They still have to go through the process. It's the point of it. But just kind of looking at the process it's going to go through, and just all the political and legal dynamics around it, I think it's unlikely that that at the end of the day, Court of Appeals I could see how the Court of Appeals might go in the opposite direction as the treasurer and the Court of Claims, but I think ultimately the Supreme Court wouldn't, and therefore the as of this moment, the income tax rate is 4.25% in Michigan, and I think that it probably will be that when all the dust settles on this issue through all the appeals. So, to the extent that you do your own payroll, you do withholdings, Michigan's income tax rate 4.25%.
All right, well, thanks for the update there. Let's talk about the December unemployment numbers. They tipped up again. What's happening?
Yeah, so we've had four months in a row of the unemployment rate in Michigan going up. So they're not big swings, but they got low, kind of unusually low there for a while. They went down to 3.6%. So in Michigan, our unemployment rate is usually not in the threes. And but at that time, we were kind of on the tail end of unusually low labor force participation. And then labor force participation finally started to catch up to pre-pandemic levels. And so you've heard me say before that there's good unemployment and bad unemployment. Kind of good unemployment sounds weird to say, but really the main driver behind the rate going up the last 4 months are more people entering the workforce. In other words, people that were not searching for work before are now back in the labor force and looking for work. So it is something that, again, 4 months in a row of an increasing unemployment rate, generally it does, you got to really consider what that means, and that's, you don't want to see it trending in that direction generally, but at least the primary cause of that, if you really dig into the numbers, does appear to be people entering the workforce, not people losing their jobs. So what happens from here? Most economists are not predicting at this point that there's going to be any big swings, and even if the economy does soften somewhat, that it's not really anticipated that large scale type unemployment like what we've seen. What is it, 12 years ago now or 13 years ago now? Is not likely in the cards. But again, if the unemployment rate is going to go up, this is the best reason for it to go up, labor force increasing.
Absolutely. All right, let's round out another news item, which is Line 5. They were in the news, or the project was in the news with a permit challenge. So can you tell us more?
Yeah, I try to let you know when something happens that surprises me, and I was surprised last month when the Public Service Commission approved the Line 5 permit, which is one of the last steps that it needed to put the tunnel that's on the Straits of Mackinac Lake bed to bore to take the pipeline and put it in a bored tunnel 100 feet into bedrock below the surface, or below the lake bed. That has been through all kinds of court challenges, but then the Public Service Commission, which are appointees of the governor, approved the permit. It's really the last thing that was at the state level that needed to happen for that to move forward. They still need the Army Corps of Engineers permit at the federal level, which is taking a very long time. But at the state level, that decision came down, and that is being challenged by some environmental groups. It's hard for me to imagine the environmental groups prevailing on this court action, because if there was anything that the Public Service Commission could have done, just knowing that the appointees that are on the Public Service Commission, I think if they had any grounds to deny the permit, legal grounds to deny the permit, they probably would have, just because of their kind of political positioning on the issue. But there really aren't legal grounds to do so. The conditions to be issued a permit have been met, and so it was a foregone conclusion. But it will have a few more steps to take in court. Ultimately, I don't think that this particular challenge will delay the project, because the Army Corps of Engineers has continued to delay getting to their environmental review, which is a pretty long-term process.
All right, so that kind of wraps up what happened in 2023, and now we need to focus on 2024. And Brian, you invited Kyle Mullen of MERS News to co-host a webinar with you this week, Thursday. It's actually for our VIP and elite members, but I know a lot of you do tune in, and it's never too late to upgrade in order to gain access to this kind of programming. So I'm going to drop the link in the chat, and then Brian, can you just give us a little preview about what you and Kyle are going to cover on that webinar?
Well, if you're interested in the political landscape and all the things that are happening politically, both at the state and the federal level, you won't want to miss this. First of all, Kyle Mullen, he's the editor of MERS News. If you read our watchdog, the content, the articles from that are a partnership with MERS News. They're really on top of it. The full-time reporters, all they do is cover the things that are happening in government. Kyle has better insight than anybody. So we're going to cover all kinds of aspects of the various things that are going to happen in 2024. And so I think it's going to be very, very interesting. If you're interested in politics and public policy, this will be one that you're definitely going to want to sign up for.
Absolutely. So I did share the link, or you can email us if you have some questions about registering at sbam@sbam.org. All right, it is Monday, and so it is our first Data Monday of 2024.
All right, well, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go with the year-end results of our what they call the U-Haul. Oh, let me see if I can.
Oh yeah, your subtitles. Yeah, there you go.
It's making me turn on the subtitles again. So the first of all, U-Haul every year puts out a report of the net ins and outs of Michigan. So essentially, this is kind of a proxy for where people are moving to and where they're moving from. So the number one inflow is to Texas, not a surprise. That Texas has averaged for the last 10 years a net increase of about 1,000 people per day over 10 years. So Texas is the net inbound. Florida coming in at number 2, but North and South Carolina at 3 and 4, Tennessee at number 5. So what was interesting, so you've got that Southeast Michigan or Southeast United States as being the hot spot. We all know that. Like, those are areas that are gaining congressional seats. They're doing really well in terms of population growth. But then what might surprise you, if you look at these places, look at the second half of the top 10, Idaho, Washington State, Arizona, Colorado, and then Virginia, of course, being in back on the eastern seaboard. But those 4 have a lot to do with, look at the second column, the bottom 10, you see number 50 is California. So the biggest outbound migration is California. Well, what sort of places do Californians go when they're moving? Well, probably places like Colorado or Arizona or Washington or Idaho. Okay, so those states that are growing have a lot to do with their proximity to a state that is losing a lot of population. So unfortunately, Michigan does show up in the bottom 10 here, 46th. Population challenges, nothing new here in Michigan. The unemployment rate, just showing the national rate here, which was actually down a little bit. I think I mentioned before with the state rate being up a little bit to 4.4%, the national rate at 3.7. And then the jobs report came out. A lot of reports came out early this month. This would be where we close the end of the year, the December numbers. The jobs report came in at 216,000 to the good, so up 216,000. If you were to look at this, this overall monthly jobs report, going way back to the early days of the pandemic, you see it was way down and then it was way up. And then it was a pretty hot job market, and it's been kind of coming in for that kind of famous soft landing that the Federal Reserve was hoping for. And if you look at the course, these are monthly numbers. Those orange bars are monthly numbers. You can see that it's generally been trending soft, but not going negative. Remember, this is not GDP. These are the jobs report. And then personal wages. You'll see that this is at 4.1% in terms of increases. And then I just wanted to show in the jobs report some of the biggest ups and downs. Education and healthcare services was the biggest gainer. Government actually came in as number 2. And then leisure and hospitality, that really has seemed to have caught up a lot in the last year in terms of gaining back workforce. The transportation and warehousing being a bigger loser on here. And then the last thing I wanted to point to here was labor force participation. So you see in orange, you'll see the labor force participation rate among men. In purple, you'll see it among women, and then the average between the two. And you'll see it actually, while in Michigan it was up a little bit, nationwide it's steady, but down a little bit. You'll see the women's labor force participation trailing off a little more. And so those are the numbers and where we ended the year. So you might recall from the last report, last small business briefing that we did of last year, which looked at things through November. And generally speaking, what I said was that if you would have told me where we would end in November back in January, when there were a lot of economic concerns, that I would have been pretty happy with where we closed the year. Nothing in the December numbers changed that attitude about it. I think we're in a relatively strong position, especially considering what some of the concerns were as we entered 2023. Now that we're into 2024, one of my biggest concerns, and I'll just kind of leave this as a teaser that I expect that we will be covering here pretty soon, is that you remember we've been battling both at the federal and the state level independent contractor rules that would limit what independent contractors can do or who can be classified and to operate as an independent contractor. At the state level, we're pretty confident that the law is not going to change or not going to change substantially there. However, the U.S. Department of Labor had proposed some rules. They took public comments. Our members put in lots of public comments. We think over 1,000 public comments into the process. Now it's being reported that the Department of Labor is on the verge of releasing new independent contractor rules, taking the public comment into consideration for like a final rule. They will release, and I haven't seen it yet. It's not, as far as I know, it's not released unless it just came out. And but some of the reports and some insiders think that it will be a pretty substantial change. And if that's the case, we will definitely report on it here. Well, either way, we'll report on it here. But I think if it is substantial in its change, it very well might exceed what the Department of Labor can do. And if that's the case, then it will be challenged in court. And this is the sort of thing where the gig economy has gotten so big and so important in the U.S. economy that that wouldn't be surprised if you saw a challenge in that law go the distance through the legal process, because this issue is just not going to go away. It's not a fad. The idea of people being their own bosses and working as independent contractors, it's not going anywhere. And I think to the extent that the government, through bureaucratic means, tries to limit that part of the economy, that there'll be some pretty substantial pushback from a lot of people who have just decided that they like the flexibility and that's how they want to make their living.
All right, well, I know you'll keep on top of that issue and share what we learn back here on the briefing and also in some email alerts. Thank you for tuning in today. We will be back here Thursday at 3 p.m. We'll see you then.
Thanks, everybody.